Okay, when we're talking about the preterite, there's also some words that you'll see in a sentence that might help you know whether you should be using the preterite or not. And this is going to come in handy when we actually get into the imperfect in the next chapter, and you're trying to decide between the two. This comes from your book, and then I added a couple of extras. The preterite tense presents information as an event, and let's see, what are they? All right, so then they just give you these words. For example, if you see these types of markers often accompany the preterite. So if you see ayer in your sentence, that means you're usually going to use the preterite. You did it yesterday. Anoche, last night. That also indicates the preterite. El lunes, el martes, on Monday. Like, on Monday, yo fui a la clase de español. Or on el lunes, asistí a la clase de español. So, when you're saying on Monday or on Tuesday, I did this. La semana pasada, last week. La semana pasada, fui a la playa. Maybe you guys went to the beach for spring break. Or visité a mis papás. El año pasado estudié en la Universidad de Carolina del Norte. So maybe last year you studied at a different school. Anteayer, the day before yesterday. Anteayer, fui a un ensayo de béisbol. El otro día, the other day, el 6 de So you could say on which, telling the date, on this particular date, I did this. El mes pasado. And here's some other ones. They're some of the same ones, but desde el primer momento, durante 2 siglos, el otro día, en ese momento, entonces, esta mañana, esta tarde. So like this morning I did this afternoon I did this, last week I did this, last month, last year, 2 days ago, a year ago, or 2 years ago, ayer por la mañana, ayer por la tarde. So here are some other expressions, and when you see any of these expressions, you tend to use the preterite. So for example, let's look at this. This is an activity in your My Language Labs. You just read the expressions below and select the ones that refer to a time in the past. So we saw anteayer, which is the day before yesterday, la semana pasada, last week, al mes siguiente, that would be next month, so that would not be one. El mes anterior, the month before. La semana que viene, that's going to be next month, so you wouldn't use that. La próxima semana, that's next month. Hace 2 meses, that's 2 months ago. Anytime you have hace in front of a time period, that means ago. So if it's hace un año, that's a year ago. Hace 2 meses, 2 months ago. Hace 3 semanas, 3 weeks ago. En aquel momento, en 2 semanas, that would be in the future. I think in that moment, I would probably use the preterite within that moment. Un año antes, aquella mañana, that un año antes, definitely a year before. En 2 semanas means in 2 weeks, so that would be the future. That morning, I would use that. Un mes después, that would be the future. That would be a month afterwards. So, okay, so ours are all right. So, again, anteayer would be the day before yesterday. La semana pasada would be last week. Al mes siguiente. Siguiente means that's coming, so that's the month that's coming. That would be future. El mes anterior would be the month before, an anterior month. La semana que viene, that also means the week that's coming. That's future. La próxima semana, that's next week. That would be future. Hace 2 meses, 2 months ago. En aquel momento, at that moment, so if you're talking about at that moment, that tends to be in the preterite. You're talking about something that's already happened. En 2 semanas would be in 2 weeks. That's the future. Un año antes, a year before. Aquella mañana, that morning, So that would be the past. And un mes después is a month later. Okay. Okay, something else that your book mentions is talking about dates. And you don't need to look at the sequencing of events yet. We'll do that in a minute. And so when you want to talk about the date, you want to say that something happened on a particular day. I don't use in for on a day. So for example, if you wanted to say, I have a test on Wednesday, you would say, tengo, whoops, I can't spell. Tengo un examen el miércoles. So you use the masculine article the when you want to say that something is happening on a particular day, okay? And if something happens repeatedly, you just make it plural. So maybe you'd say, tengo la clase de, español los lunes, miércoles y viernes, okay? So you use the plural when you do something on a regular basis. So maybe voy al cine el viernes. Like I'm going to the movies on Friday, but maybe voy a la iglesia, I go to church, los sábados, okay? So you use el when you're doing something, when you're saying you're doing something on a day, and you're going to use los when you do something repeatedly on a day, and you just make the day of the week plural. If the day of the week that you're using already has an S, like miércoles or lunes or jueves, you don't need to add another S to it. It's just sábado and domingo that you would make plural if you're doing it on multiple days. Then if you look over here, cuando llegaste a Chile, when you talk about in a particular month, in a particular year, that's when you can use the en. So, cuando llegaste a Chile en marzo de 1900, you wouldn't say el marzo. So, you'd say el for the day in which you do something, but you would use en for the if you're just going to mention the month, okay? And also in the year. Cuando terminó Juan sus estudios en el 2014, and they're saying that you need to put the el in front, you need to put an article in front of the year when you're saying in what year you did something. When did Juan? En el 2000, or you could leave it out. ¿En qué año se casó? En 1985. So you could do either or. En el 2014, en el 1985, or in el. So just remember that when you talk about on a particular day, the on is el, but when you talk about in a month or in a year, you are using en. Okay, and the last thing that your chapter talks about is sequencing past events, so that maybe you want to mention that you do more than one thing at a time. You can use the phrases antes or antes de, después, después de, and luego. So antes is before, después de, antes is before, después is after, and luego is then. Okay, so for example, fui a la facultad, pero antes estuve en la biblioteca. So I went to the school, but before that, I was at the library, okay? So we're only going to use, let's see, note that after and before. When you use antes, if following that particular phrase is a conjugated verb. If you use an infinitive, you're going to need to put de. So, antes de ir a la facultad, estuve en la biblioteca. So, if you wanted to use, if you don't want to conjugate, if you want to flip that sentence around and say, before going to the school, I was at the library, you're going to need to put a de in there. So, después de estar en la biblioteca, fui a la facultad. So, after being at the library, I went to the school. Entonces is a very common connector that's used. You can use entonces and luego. That means kind of then. So, me fui a vivir a Italia en el 71, meaning I went to live in Italy in 71. Entonces, yo era muy joven. Then I was very young then. I went to Italy in 71. I was very young then. Juan fue a la biblioteca pero no pudo encontrar a su amigo. Entonces fue al apartamento, pero tampoco lo encontró. So you can also use entonces as a sequencer to say that something happened next. So I went to the library, but I couldn't find my friend. Then, Juan went to the library, but he couldn't find his friend. Then he went to the apartment, but he couldn't find him there either. And you can use luego like that too. Estuve en la biblioteca y después fui a la facultad. So I was in the library and afterwards I went to the school. Luego volví a casa. Then I returned to house. So you can use luego and entonces like then for sequencing of events, like what you did next. Let's see. So note that in Spanish the words for after and before are followed by an infinitive rather than by ing form. So yes, when you're conjugating, we would say after being at the library. In Spanish, when you make that type of construction, like they only use present progressive for saying what you're doing right at this moment. In this situation where you're using a present participle, they use the infinitive. So we would say after being at the library, and when you're trying to say that, you would use an infinitive. Después de estar en la biblioteca. So they often use an infinitive when we would use the present progressive. But also just remember, if you're using antes precedes a conjugated verb like estuve, and después too. Después, and so después comes before fui, antes comes before estuve. But if you use antes de and después de, what needs to follow those is an infinitive. An unconjugated form of the verb. So you can see right here. Después de estar, antes de ir, okay? But antes, without the de, has to be followed by a conjugated verb. And you can see that they just kept rewriting the same sentence, just writing it in a different way, that there's more than one way in which you could write the sentence, okay? And so hopefully that helps.